Yeah, it's like a quick.
Oh yeah, go ahead. I'm still just, can I sit here and do stuff?
Yeah. All right, at 6, let's get started. Fill out the attendance link if you haven't done so yet, so we can get these VAPs pushed out to you next week. October 4th, I believe. It's at 6 p.m. in East Hall 1. That's in the basement here. Topic will be Juniper SRX, and it will be streamed or recorded depending on how things shake out. But yeah. Yep, that's all we got up top. Are you ready to go?
Yep.
Okay, so Jacob's going to start with Active Directory first.
Sweet. Okay, so I know it says Windows domain, but we're going to focus a little bit more on Active Directory. Most of you should, if you guys participated in the mock, be pretty familiar with this if you're on Windows side. It can be a pain. It can also be your best friend, but it's something that eventually you're going to need to face and try to wrangle it and understand, at least at a basic level, how it works for CCDC. And if you're going to go on and work for an actual company sometime, it's going to be one of the biggest beasts that you're probably going to manage or a coworker is going to manage. So pays to know. So Active Directory is part of a Windows domain. It basically acts as a centralized repository for everything in the entire company that's Windows-based. So it's going to be users, computers, printers, client workstations, anything. Everything's all kind of garbled into one system. It makes it easier for a system administrator to be able to keep track of users and computers. Also, if a new employee joins the company, it's easy to easily get them integrated in rather than having to go to each system one by one and setting up a local user account, right? They can just do it from one main system and just have it single sign-on for the entire company. So from a system administrator perspective, we're only dealing with about 10 to 16 boxes in CCDC, but if you move on to a company where you're going to have 300, 400, sometimes thousands of workstations and servers, it starts adding up really quick. So I'm going to explain kind of the theoretical first of like what is a domain. Before I start getting into this stuff, there is a DefSec Active Directory VApp I think got pushed out to you guys, so just make sure you guys have that, and if you guys don't, let me know. But we'll be going over like a mini lab after this. But as far as the logical part of it, so that's exactly what a domain is. It's kind of the a logical partition for security's sake and ease of use of different groups of machines depending on geographic location, duties, or anything under the sun, really. And it's always going to be referred to by its fully qualified domain name. So it's in our example, it's going to be defsec.local. So usually that'd be the domain name of your company or maybe your web servers, or maybe this is just how your naming schema is set up. So I would be, computer1.defsec.local. That would be kind of the setup of our domain, and so on and so forth for servers and workstations and things like that. So yeah, just printers, users, databases, everything essentially. So something that doesn't really get talked about or hit on much in CCDC is the forest structure. So this is not something that you guys will ever really have to deal with in CCDC. If you guys have set up your own Active Directory before, or maybe helped out on White Team, you may have seen the dialog options for it and wondered what that is. And basically it's just a large kind of group of domains. So when they're grouped together, it's considered a forest. And the reason is because they tree out. So Up at the very top, we'd have the one that we initially create, defsec.local, which would kind of be your forest root domain, so same as a root file system. That's going to be the base, and then from there on, you can go on and, in this example, it does it via different geographic locations. So you have Europe.defsec.local, you got Africa.defsec.local, Asia, and then from there on, it can also tree out a little more into specifically your web servers, maybe your sales departments, accounting departments, administrators, stuff like that. So, like I said, not only is it logically, it's also a good security mechanism, keep things partitioned off. You may do that at the network level with firewalls and other kind of policies, but doing it from an actual user account perspective is very effective. So for the individual computer, if I was in Europe.defsec.local, my actual computer name would be, or I guess it would be referred to as computer1.europe.defsec.local. So from that, I'm able to easily now tell where I'm located and what domain I'm a part of. So the king of this bad boy is going to be a domain controller. You guys will all get one or two in CCDC, and this is going to kind of be the keys to your kingdom. You guys are going to have to guard that. One lucky person or two are going to get to oversee that, and it shouldn't be taken very lightly. I know at the last mock, there was a lot of confusion about what to do differently with a DC or what to do differently with a server. So make sure whoever you have on your DC is understanding that the box that they have is kind of the overload to the other boxes. Every single user in your AD environment is going to use the domain controller as the authentication service to authenticate to the domain. So if the user here was trying to log into the domain, it would send a request to the domain controller, in which the domain controller would check with its database and see if that's actually a correct username and password combination. And then if it gets the OK from the database, it's going to spit back a actual ticket for Kerberos. So understanding how that works is kind of out of scope of CCDC, but just know that essentially it's a check request, and then it sends back a confirmation if you can log in or not. So kind of a little bit on the back end of how that works, you guys do need to know as far as if you guys are setting up internal firewall rules, that all runs on something called LDAP, which is the Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. So LDAP is basically the communication in which we just talked about, in which the server or workstation is going to reach out to the domain controller, check if a user account exists, and if it does, check with the database and AOK it. And that only does not only go for users and computers, it also goes for group policies and anything else that's pushed out to the domain. So I have DNS, Kerberos, and group policies. So these are three essential things that a domain kind of relies on as well. A lot of times if you guys had DNS, I believe your guys' DNS was on the domain controller, right, Dylan? At the last mock, yeah. So if you guys lost your DC, you lost your DNS and your Active Directory in one blow, but sometimes they'll be located on Linux box or somewhere else in the environment. So just know that it's all very dependent on DNS. If DNS breaks, the workstations and other computers, the way they rely on communicating with your domain controller is going to be via those DNS records. So a lot of stuff breaks if DNS breaks. And so then Kerberos obviously is the password authentication, and then group policies. So we'll probably talk more about group policies as we go on, but group policies are basically how a system administrator from a administrative perspective can basically push out a security policy, password policy, logon restrictions, anything like that, domain-wide to all the users and computers. So if you guys had to deal with password complexity requirements in an inject, or maybe like a logon banner and stuff like that, all that stuff can be configured in group policy, and it pays to kind of know where that's at and how to set that up. So we're already to the lab, so if you guys want to open up the DefSec Active Directory VApp, I'm actually just going to walk through setting up a basic domain, and then kind of how you guys can get started playing around with that. actually have to boot mine up here, so give it a second. Does anyone not have it that wants it? I probably should have started this before. I know, right? So how many of you guys were on the domain controller for the mock? 1, 2, 3. All right. How fun was it? Good time?
You saying you can't just shut down everything?
What do you mean?
You saying you just can't shut down all access to any other device?
No. Not if you have a company running.
With a DC.
All right. Should be password 1 bang. I cloned down one earlier actually, and it wasn't password 1 bang, so crazy. So this box, even though I haven't named domain controller, is just a regular Windows Server. It should be 2016, so nothing special about it. We just have to actually create the domain and then promote it. So we're gonna hit add roles and features. And then just next, do role-based, feature-based installation. Keep going. It's usually good practice to rename your machine too, so it's like an actual recognizable name. This one has like a randomly generated one, but for our sake, it doesn't matter. And then we're going to click Active Directory Domain Services right here. Should be second from the top. And go ahead and add all the features. And then we're also going to add DNS Server. So, like I said, it's configurable. You don't have to have the DNS Server as the DC, but most commonly your DC is going to function as one of your main DNS servers. And just go ahead and next through the rest of this. And then hit install. Should take a little bit. Yep, so the only things you should be checking is Active Directory Domain Services, DNS, and then if they have pop-up boxes correlating to that, just accept it. That's going to install remote server administration tools and some group policy management tools. Question? So that's going to take a little sec here. So I think DNS is a fantastic example of a service in CCDC where it might not necessarily be a scored service all the time, but it coming down can completely destroy your network and start to affect your scored services. So not only should the person working on the domain controller be aware of how LDAP can maybe lock people out of their machines, they should also be very aware of how DNS can bring down your web servers or bring down how databases communicate. So. Is anyone not at this part that's following around? Anyone lost? All right, what's up? Oh, okay. Okay. So really, it doesn't matter. You could actually use, as long as you didn't use the client one, technically any of them could be a domain controller. Unfortunately, the client lacks it. I will say it's not unheard of in CCDC for every machine to suddenly become a domain controller. Just install domain services in DNS. Yeah, that'll be fine for now. Do you guys have to set that up from scratch? Or does it come configured? Okay. Sure. Sure. Yeah, so, you know, there's other competitions other than just CCDC, so some competitions might actually have to have you go through this setup, or, I mean, in some cases in CCDC, you might lose the actual domain controller and you got to rebuild it from scratch. So my installation finished. I'll close that. It's going to check for updates, but we don't have internet, so. Oh, wait a second. So once you guys finish that installer, go ahead and click on this yield icon here, and it should say promote this server to a domain controller. So essentially what we did is we installed the Active Directory, you know, the LDAP kind of role to the machine, but we didn't necessarily make this machine the domain controller. So we didn't actually put it in charge of the newly created domain. Or of the role, I guess. We haven't made a domain yet. So we'll click on that. And then here's actually where we're going to get to name our domain. So we have three options. We have add a domain controller to an existing domain, add a new domain to an existing forest, or add a new forest. So we talked about forests and domains. So we don't have an existing one. So this would be if we were appending maybe a secondary domain controller or something like that. But we're making a whole new one. So we'll do defsec.local there. How many of you guys are still on the installation screen? Okay, I'll wait a little bit. One. What?
You know my luck with installing stuff.
Or just keep cruising and make us watch the recorded video. Then you get the information.
That's true. That's true. This stuff is not too bad, so I will keep going. So I'll hit next to this. And then maybe it'll work. Maybe. I would have hit next a lot sooner if I'd done it. It's going to take that long. There we go. Okay, so here it's going to talk about the functional level of a forest. So this might be the main time you have to worry about in CCDC, like I said. So here you're going to set the actual the level of servers. So when it talks about level, it's going to talk about Windows Server 2008, 2012, 2016. So the versions of Windows that are allowed to function on the domain. And most commonly, this is going to automatically set itself to whatever the machine is you're setting the domain up with. So Windows Server 2016 is going to set the forest functional level of that. Anything below that is perfectly fine to function in the forest. So it's usually good habit if you know you're going to be setting up any boxes newer to set the forest functional level higher. And then here we can set up a directory services restore password. So you can actually export the database of Active Directory. So and then append a password to it. So that's actually a good practice in CCDC to actually export your Active Directory database and make a backup of it. Just in case the red team does nuke it, you can actually do this, set up a whole new domain, restore. So I'll just set password, doesn't really matter. Hit next. Oh. We have password complexity requirements. Password 1, bang it is. And how many of you guys are still on the installation? All right, less progress. we'll keep nexting. Wait a little more. Keep nexting. No autofill options. And then here it's gonna, you can specify where you want to store things, but we don't care. Default's fine. Keep nexting. And so then it's gonna let us know that once we start installing this, it's gonna reboot at the end. So the only thing longer than a Windows installation is a Windows reboot. So you guys picked the right side. So just to reiterate, for those just finishing the installation, yield icon, promote this server to a domain controller. Then it's going to ask you, what do you want to name the forest? Make sure you're selecting create a new forest or add a new forest, defsec.local. And then just next through things. I'll install that. Cool. Now we'll start that installation. Is anyone lost? Okay. I'll just keep nexting to this stuff. I just put password one bang. It has to be a certain complexity, so that seems to be the magic sauce. So. Nope. Nope. So that would be if we're adding it to an existing DNS server. So, yep, just keep nexting through. And then it's going to let us know it's going to restart. So, please. So what this is actually going to do is, so on a normal Windows server or Windows client box, you're going to have local users and groups. So these are going to be on your laptops right now. If you log in with user DSU or something like that, right? DSU exists locally on that laptop. This is actually going to get rid of all the local groups and users on this server and just replace them with Active Directory LDAP. So common misconception is that both exist on a domain controller. And in fact, only Active Directory users exist. So if you do any modifications, so if you, let me put it this way, if you run the commands to modify local users and groups like you would normally on a workstation or a server, but you're doing it on a domain controller, it'll actually just make those changes to Active Directory. So your commands do kind of change over. Is anyone at this stage yet? Like they started rebooting? Okay, awesome. Evan, we'd be done already if Windows didn't take so long.
I know, right?
I'm sorry.
That's fine. Linux doesn't take nearly as long. It's okay.
I know it doesn't do nearly as much either.
What?
Nothing. since LDAP is actually just a protocol, you can actually connect Linux boxes to it as well, which is actually pretty cool. I wouldn't advise it, but
Yeah, don't.
it would make for an interesting mock, though. So I personally don't do it the GUI way. The GUI way is a good visual representation of what's going on, but I'll show you guys a way afterwards that you can do it all through PowerShell. So she is now rebooted. We'll log back in. Ah, there they are. I was worried for a second. So give it a second to load things in, but now on the left we should be able to see the different roles we installed. So Active Directory Domain Services, ADDS, that'll show up on the side here, and then DNS as well. So give us the status of it. I believe. Actually had a DSA MSC, so I usually do this through the run prompt here. Oh. Okay, so here I had a couple of shortcuts as far as managing a domain. So right here, dsa.msc. If you go ahead and type that in search or in run, that should bring up Active Directory users and computers. There's a, I'm sure you can just search for Active Directory users and computers as well, and that'll bring it up. But you guys have all seen this before, I'm sure. So we have our users now, default users. Our administrator account that we had is now promoted to a domain administrator. Any local user accounts we had are wiped away. And so then under computers, we have the one existing computer, which is now joined to the domain. And so then essentially this is the, as we talked about before, this is the root of the forest. So if we had multiple domains from there and we were managing this from the root DC, we would then be able to see an expansion of different Active Directories. And then DNS, another one. DNS MGMT. .msc. So when Windows is being really slow like this, especially in the ILab, I find knowing those shortcuts is a heck of a lot easier than waiting for your mouse to move across the screen and then click on something and then find out you clicked on the wrong thing, and then Internet Explorer pops up. So, and then here we can see we installed our DNS server, and we'll have our forward, reverse, all of our lookup zones, and there should be records in here now pointing for our domain. So these are the things now. If those get busted or we lose DNS, stuff's going to start breaking. Is everybody at this basic part? Cool. So we're going to hop over now to Windows Server. We're going to add this one to the domain, actually. So we're going to have 2 boxes on there now. So any domain user account can add users to a domain by default. Most commonly, and for this example, we'll add it with a domain user or domain admin, but typically that's bad practice. Usually in an actual environment, you don't want every user on the entire domain to be able to add any computer to a domain. That just presents intrinsic risk. So used to 2016. So system. So we'll go to system for this. And then change settings. So I hit start, typed in system, clicked on system. There's system configuration, other things, don't click on those. And then it's going to pull up system properties, and it's going to say to rename this computer, change its domain or work group, click change. So currently it's not associated with anything. And then we'll change this from a work group to a domain, defsec.local. Now an important part of this that I already set up was I already set these machines up with IP addresses, but I also set this Windows machine up to point its DNS request to the DC. So when it makes a DNS lookup for defsec.local now to say, what is that? I don't know what machine that is, right? It's going to be sending that to the DC, which is important because otherwise it's going to send it to an actual DNS server or something that wouldn't have it in its records, right? And so it wouldn't be able to connect. So it's going to prompt us now after successfully making that request for login credentials. So we'll use the same login credentials that we just set up the domain with. So whatever the administrator username and password was on that machine, luckily for us it's the same. So administrator password 1 bang. And then we'll send that request off, and it will say, welcome to the defsec.local domain. So now we've successfully added this in. At this point, it's going to ask us to restart. And during restart, it's going to start and reboot. It's going to pull down any policies in that domain that were in it. So now, with this machine by itself, you know, it was the ruler of its land. If it had bad password policies, if it let you log in at any time of the day, if you let your background on your laptop be whatever you wanted, that's fine. But now it's part of a domain, so if there was group policies preventing any of that kind of stuff, it would download those and update. And so then by the time it reboots, it would now be just like any other server or computer on that domain. Should be rebooting here. Did I lose anyone with this adding part? Okay. What part are we at? Okay, this thing has not rebooted yet, so while it is still with us, we'll start over. So go ahead and hit start, and I just search for system, and then I click the first one under control panel. That should bring up this this dialog, and that should be change settings right here. So let's see if I can just zoom this whole thing. And then it'll bring up this dialog. And then hit change, and then this is where I switch it over to the domain, defsec.local, entered my creds, send it off, good to go. Yes?
Mine says the active directory doesn't make each one.
Okay. So that meant it was not able to make that DNS request. Is your DC done rebooting? And it installed and everything, and you had Active Directory and everything working? Okay. Try bringing down the firewall on your DC and pinging it and see if you have a connection. Same thing for you? Interesting. Did it work for anyone? Or am I the only one it worked for? Ah. Who hasn't tried it yet?
I'm still trying to set the DC.
Okay. So you guys got all the could not be contacted?
Yeah.
Okay. Try bringing the firewall down on the DC. So I'll go do that. That shouldn't affect anything though. Did you guys name your domain defsec.local? Okay. Another thing I would check is on your machine, I would make sure that, what is it here? So on your server, not the DC, do ncpa.cpl, or just right click on the network connections, either one. And then make sure and check that your DNS server is pointing at the right thing. So it should be pointing at 10.0.0.2. I'm doing it on my domain controller, but do this on your server. Because mine is rebooting. Because these should have cloned down right, but. Okay, then Internet Protocol version 4, and then check your IPs. What do you guys have here? Okay, so it didn't pull down the IP information, Cody. That's interesting. So switch that over to use the following IP address. And then set your, so mine is .2 right now, don't set it to this. So set yours to .7, doesn't matter. So I'll set it to what you guys should set it to right now. And then set it to, so set yours to look like this. On the server, not the DC. And then once you guys do this, I would go to your DC and make sure that it also is set. That should be set to .2. So everything should be the same, just set it to .2. Did it work now? Trying to, okay. Sure. You probably will have to set your DC IP as well though. You're able to connect? Okay. Okay, never mind then. Just try setting your server to this information and then try connecting to the domain again. That worked? Okay. Weird. Right. So, like I said before, it's very important to have the correct DNS server listed. So, this is sending those requests to the actual DC, asking for its name. Question?
Mine's still not working.
You're still not working?
No.
Okay, and did you set your server or your DC to this stuff?
Server.
Server? Okay. Check the DC and make sure that it has stuff filled in here as well. Make sure it doesn't say obtain automatically. I saw it and yeah. Sure. Yeah, if it asks, yeah. You're doing it on domain control. So make sure you're doing it on the server. So I'm doing it on the domain controller, but you need to do it on mine was rebooting, that's what I'm saying. So Yes, so set this to the server, and the DC you shouldn't have to touch. So I'm gonna set mine back so it just doesn't break things, but so click the find arrow or whatever, start button, you're on server, so it might be a little different. ncpa.cpl. And then go properties, right click properties, IPv4 properties, and then set it. Just for sake of time, I'm gonna keep going here, but if you guys set those, they should be communicate. It'll be added to the domain now. So my server rebooted now, and it should be added to the domain. So if I go to Active Directory now on here, and I go to computers, Windows Server 1 now is showing up there, which remember is the name of the server. So now if I created a user here in Active Directory, right click, and I just did new user. So I right clicked on users and hit new, and I'll just do Jacob, doesn't matter. Don't want to change password, next log on, password 1 bang. And hit finish. This should replicate onto that that workstation as well. So then I can go to that, not that workstation, that server. And so I should be able to now go to that server, log in as Jacob, and it will send that LDAP request to the DC, say, is Jacob a valid user? The DC will now look in this database, and it will say, yep. Does it have the password, password bang? Yep. And then it's going to send back a temporary ticket to the server, which is going to allow you access now to the machine and the machine's owned resources. Yes. Should just be 255 and then just 0.0.0. Dot 1. So 10.0.0.1. So like I said, for sake of time, I'm not going to actually go and check that, but the same process will work for the client. So you can take the client, go in the system the same way, authenticate defsec.local, log in with same user credentials, add it in, and then you'll have a standard 3-system domain. You can add more VMs to that VApp if you want. So just a VApp for you guys to play with as far as domain stuff goes. If you want to simulate adding, deleting users. And here I just had some useful shortcuts. We'll upload this PowerPoint to the drive so you guys can reference them. So these are like godsends, honestly. Just being able to open system properties, DNS manager, network and sharing center, stuff like that very quickly. And then the whole process that I just went through as far as adding the user Jacob can actually just be done all from the command line on the DC. So if I open up command prompt, I can actually just do net user, we'll do Jacob2, password 1 bang, /add/domain. You can also do the same with the PowerShell module, and then you can also query a domain. So if you want to see just the users, so perhaps you just got into the box on CCDC, right? Or someone threw you into the DC role and you'd been on Windows Server the whole time. And you just want to see the users in the domain, but you don't have time to either open up the entire GUI, or maybe you actually have server core where you don't have a GUI. You can actually use all the normal local Windows commands, wizard commands. Those work too. So net users, net local group, all those kind of things, pipe those into TXTs, go through them. CIC command completed successfully, so now that user should show up. So now if I did net users, it's going to show all those accounts that I had now configured in Active Directory in that GUI now show up here. So getting familiar as far as running the net user command, so adding users, deleting users, changing passwords, like net user Jacob2 password, and then whatever password I want right now, as long as I'm running command prompt as administrator, which I am, we'll change the password. That is very, very useful if you now realized, oh crap, Red Team has my domain administrator credentials and I want to run net user administrator password, right? As long as Red Team's not like watching you or maybe keylogging you, right? That's a fairly safe and quick way to change a password. You are typing it in plain text, so it's not as safe as it can be, but it does pay to know how to do it and not have to go right-click, change password, etc. And then the last thing, that entire process we just went through can be run in these 4 commands. Yeah. You just boot up PowerShell and you can install Windows Feature, AD services, and everything, and it should. I did this before it presented. So literally everything we just did through the GUI, the whole long install we just waited through, this was probably a max of 3 minutes. I used these 3 PowerShell commands, and then the last one here actually installs the forest, and then it's asking me to type in my domain name. So I would do defsec.local, and then it would ask for the password for the database like we did before. And then it's going to continue through to ask the more questions like we did with the install. But the point is, I don't have to wait for that long install. And then at the end of this, I will do the reboot. And then it will be a domain administrator as well, or domain controller as well. Any questions? Okay. I know this last part was a little rushed, but I want to make sure there's time for Linux. Evan's got some cool stuff.
I do?
You do now. I said it's cool. Cool. That's all I got. So, domain administrators, read up. Oh my gosh.
Can I borrow that actually?
It's the same one you got, isn't it?
Yeah, Marcus, please. All right. Jeez, how much heat does that MacBook put off? This whole desk is warm. Good God. Oh, I know. It's so bad. Oh, of course. So I'm going to just jump right in. So tonight we're covering Linux services, Red Hat, and actually network configuration. That's just too long of a title. So for those of you that haven't heard of Red Hat, that is Red Hat Enterprise Linux. It's actually one of the few distributions that you kind of have to pay for. It's more paying for service than the actual distro. Reason for using it, really fast patching and vulnerability reaction. Was it Shell Shock that was patched within like 2 hours of being released into the wild? Something like that. Red Hat was super good about it. But obviously we're not going to use the paid version here in mock competitions. Other related distros that are based on Red Hat are CentOS, which is the open source part of Red Hat, and Fedora, which is kind of the testing upstream version of Red Hat. A lot of unstable things focused on features. Did we have CentOS or Red Hat in the last mock? It was all Debian based? Okay. We got to change that in the future. Oh, yes. Excellent. So, a lot of you guys hear of servers, you know, web server, SSH server, whatever. Those are just services on Linux, software applications that are going to run in the background. Examples are web servers like Apache or Nginx, SSH server, the LAMP stack, Cups, which is a print server, and IP tables you can actually run as a service. Like we kind of discussed in, I think it was Linux 101, our file structure, all your configuration files are going to live in /etc/etc, whatever. For example, Apache 2 on Debian-based distros, that's going to be the directory for all your Apache configs. It's called HTTPD in RedHat-based distros. So there are actually a few different ways to manage services in Linux. Older versions make use of systemd or systemv, sysv init, whatever you want to call it. Each one kind of implemented it a little differently, and I think it was Ubuntu that abandoned it first for Upstart. And it just lacked some of the ability to handle things that newer process management mechanisms can handle. First one is the service command. That is actually a cross-platform. I did not know that until I was writing this presentation. You can actually use it for systemv, Upstart, or systemd, the three main process management mechanisms in Linux that we'll talk about. It's actually going to search for whatever method you have and then use that. If it's not found, you're going to have to use the related command for your process manager. But service is just kind of a nice, I don't know, uniform way to do it. You can typically run it with, or you do run it with service, name your service, and then an option. Your options are going to be start, stop, force reload, restart or reload, one of the two. Status. There are some others, but that really kind of depends on the initd script that you have or whatever other options are specified for that service. Systemv init, if you can't use the service command, you can also use /etc/initd/ the service name, and then the option, again, start, stop, whatever. With sysv, you also have rc.local. That is a directory of other scripts that you can run on boot. Those will run after your initd scripts have already run. It's really nice for your custom stuff. It's also a really great place for red teamers to put things. Here's the bad one. Ubuntu decided to actually do something different than init, and so they had Upstart. I believe it's only in Ubuntu distros, right? I haven't seen it anywhere else. That'd be really weird. They finally capitulated when Debian adopted something else, and that's what they're based on, so they decided to roll with it. Why do I have it's used by Fedora? That's weird. Maybe it is in Fedora. That one, I believe, it's still similar to initd. It's based on initd, so I didn't really put much there. But you can also put configuration files for different services in etc init jobname.conf. Yeah, Upstart's not really my thing, and you only really have to worry about it, and I think it's Ubuntu 12, 14, somewhere in that range. And usually I think initd is still on the system. So, not a big deal. Systemd is the big one, and you're going to probably see it a lot in competitions. It was actually created by RedHat and introduced in Fedora 15 in 2010, so it's been around for quite a while. And it's actually really been adopted in pretty much every distro, at least the most up-to-date versions. CentOS adopted it with version 7 in the last few years. Arch runs it, Ubuntu, Debian, Fedora, they all run it now. Fedora's had it forever. Your scripts are actually going to live in a few different places with systemd. They can live in lib, systemd, system. Those are kind of your main ones, the ones you actually install with services. Then custom ones can live in user lib, systemd, system. Should still only really be for actual real services. But then you can put your custom ones in /etc/systemd/system. Then you'll be able to use the service command or systemctl command to manipulate those files. If you have it as a service file in one of those directories, it's a really easy interface to run them. Service, third time, service name, and then the option. Whereas systemctl, you would do systemctl, the command, so the option you want to run, such as start, stop, restart, status, bunch of others, and then the actual name of the service. Notice it's just flipped with the service command, the order that you put them in. Systemd actually really brought a cool feature to the table called unit masking. So we can start and stop services, and we can enable and disable them. Start and stop, as it implies, will start or stop your service. Enable and disable will set it to run on boot or stop it from running on boot. Unit masking is actually really cool because we can disable the service in a maybe more not permanent. You have to go through an extra step to unmask it. Creates a symbolic link to dev null, which is kind of the nothing directory on Linux. It just points it at nothing. So if I try to start a service with systemctl, it will actually say, it'll error out and say the service is masked. So it's just kind of nice to trip up maybe some red team scripts if they try and kick off some services, or you have a service that was installed on the system and you don't want it to run, and you don't want to uninstall it just in case an inject requires it. It's really nice. You can just do systemctl mask and the service, systemctl unmask and the service. Pretty easy syntax. I know that I'm moving a little quick. I just want to get to the lab because that's going to be more useful, I think, for you guys. And I threw a lot of content in here. So when you're setting up an IP on Linux, a lot of times you're probably going to, well, you might want to set it statically for some reason. A DNS server, you don't want it to change because its DHCP lease ran out. No matter the distro, you're going to have etc resolve.conf. That's where your DNS server information is. So especially in a competition, you're probably going to be running your own custom DNS. So you're going to want the IP address of those servers in etc resolve.conf. And also when you change to a static IP, you're going to want to make sure to put your DNS server in there. Otherwise, you're going to have a bad time. Then you also have etc hosts, which will contain information about hosts and the IP addresses they map to. It's kind of like your own local record, or your own local DNS records. And lastly, if you are messing with networking on Linux, you're probably going to mess with either the network service or the network manager service. I don't know what version and what distros changed, but it suddenly went from uppercase to lowercase, so that's just something to be aware. Usually you don't have to mess with the network service too much. I just have that in there in case you do. But say you want to set a static IP, you're probably going to want to disable the network manager service because it's going to overwrite all sorts of configuration files that you're going to mess with. And then, your static IP isn't going to take. So first up, we've got our Debian-based distros with etc network interfaces. That's typically what they've been doing for quite a while. Ubuntu recently moved to something called NetPlan, but this still works. So we're going to focus on that. You can either have configuration information for all your interfaces in /etc network interfaces, or if you want to organize it out more by name of your interface, you can put it in etc network interfaces.d and then a file that is named after the interface. A little nicer for organization, but competition, you're probably just going to put it all in the interfaces file. And you can bring an interface up or down, meaning turn it off or on, with the if up and if down commands. You have to specify the interface name. That is also really important when you are setting a static IP because you're going to need to basically restart the interface. And yep, like I said, you're going to probably want to disable Network Manager if you're setting it statically. And also, when you run ifconfig, you're going to see low. That's your loopback adapter. A lot of systems use it for different services. A lot of services will use it just for different things, so you never want to kill that. Otherwise, you're going to have a really, really bad time. So for setting DHCP in the Debian way, you would just go into your etc network interfaces file and set up auto with your interface name and iface, your interface name, inet DHCP. That's going to tell it, okay, I have a DHCP server. Listen on this interface for any information or send out DHCP requests on this interface. And whenever you edit these configs, DHCP or static, you need to bring your interface up or down and up again. A lot of times you can just get away with doing if up, but if down is proper practice. Setting static, you need a few more options. Starts off the same as DHCP, auto, interface name, iface interface name, inet static. But then you have to specify, in the order I have, the IP address you want the machine to have, your subnet mask, which, yeah, it's pretty easy to Google what subnet mask you have, but I think we'll be pretty easy about doing that. Usually it's slant 24, so 255.255.255. And your default gateway where you're going to push traffic to, which is typically a .1 address. It's really weird to see anything else. And again, after editing this config, you got to do if up at the very least. Otherwise, it won't take. You're going to be sitting there running ifconfig or IPA or whatever command you want to use to get your IP address, and it's not going to be showing what you want. And because you guys have access to these slides, I am putting a lot of references or resources and tutorials on how to do this. So, moving on to RedHat distros. Again, CentOS, Fedora, RedHat. They do some things a little different. I've actually been doing this a lot lately, and I kind of like it. It is in etc sysconfig network scripts, and you have to name the file with ifcfg-interface name. It contains the configuration script for whatever the interface name might be. And, oh, I did it in reverse order. Whatever. So again, for static IP, you want to disable Network Manager. And the format's a little different, but it's a little more verbose too, in my opinion. You specify your device name, in this case ETH0, your protocol, so it's the protocol it's going to use on when the machine boots. You can set none. Well, actually, you have to set none for static. For DHCP, you would set DHCP. You set it to run on boot. Then you give it the network mask, the IP address of the machine, and your default gateway. Very similar to Debian's way, just a couple extra options. You might see more in this file. You might see, MAC address, something called the UUID of the interface. If you're ever worried about it being bad, you can delete it and it gets regenerated by the system. But otherwise, just don't touch it. DHCP, super easy. Boot proto, DHCP, everything else, leave the same. Not so bad. And then yeah, don't mess with the MAC address or UUID. Like just if you ever have doubts, just leave it. A lot of resources that I found while doing this. Lastly, we want to talk about package managers. That's your main method for installing software on your system. Maybe in a mock you get to the point where you've run through the checklist and you want to install things like fail to ban, or you want to remove services you don't need that red teamers might take advantage of. Package manager is the way to do it. Or RM if it's something custom that they threw on your system that you found. It handles updates, installing new software, installing required software for the pieces of software you want to install, and many other functions. Also, packages, when you see that, that just refers to some software for Linux. So, your package manager will install from a server called a mirror, which hosts all the software for a Linux distro. Might be for a particular architecture or a particular version, but it does host the entire archive for at least that version and architecture. Debian and its derivatives use something called dpackage. Debian package, their abbreviation isn't super clear. That's on the back end. It uses apt for its front end. A lot of you in your 145 classes have probably seen that in Kali because it is Debian based. You want to use apt where possible. Dpackage is more powerful, but it doesn't have a lot of the nice features that apt does, such as dependency resolution. Installing all the programs you need for the program you actually want to install. And RedHat and its derivatives use RPM, which is the RPM package manager. It's kind of like GNU, it's a recursive acronym. And then they have Yum or DNF as a front end. Most distros are still using Yum. RedHat is, CentOS is. DNF is only in Fedora right now. It's their rewrite of Yum. They eventually plan to replace it, but Fedora is their testing ground. They want to make sure they got all the bugs worked out first. As far as I'm aware, they have not announced plans to replace it yet. And actually, their syntax is the same. So in Fedora, you can still run Yum. So you're going to hear dependencies a lot. It's typically, it's depended on by something. So in the case of Linux software, let's say I want to install the package check install. you're going to get a list of all these other packages that have to be installed in order to use it. Those are your dependencies for a package. Same thing with Yum or DNF in installing SQLite, whatever the pronunciation of that is. Your package manager is going to list dependencies. That's all you really need to know about them. So for Debian, these are some useful commands that you want to use in competition or just your daily Linux usage. apt-get update, super important because a package manager keeps a database or metadata file of all the packages in the archive or in that distro's archive. You know, what version is the distro currently on, compares it against what version you're using. And just, you know, you need that in order to actually have accurate updates. Otherwise, it's going to compare it to, say, an old version in the database, and you're not going to get updates, or it's going to, I don't think it'll downgrade you. But always want to run that before you do a system upgrade or install other software. apt-get upgrade, it will update all packages on the system. Don't do this in a competition because your bandwidth is typically throttled, and that will take a long, long time, especially if you're on an old Linux distro. apt-get install, followed by a list of packages or just one package. It will install or upgrade those packages that you specify. So apt-get install a package that's already installed will upgrade the package. Really helpful. apt-get remove will remove the specified packages. apt-get purge will remove the packages that you specify, but it will also delete the deb files, the package file that gets downloaded, and any configuration files. So if you just want to totally blow away a service off your machine, you want to kill every trace of it, that's the command to do it. apt-cache search and the package. You will search for a package related to the given name that you hand it. So maybe you don't know what the SSH server package in Debian is, so you want to search for SSH. You'll find SSH server or SSH related packages with that. apt-cache package names list all of the packages installed on the system. Really helpful if you want to make sure that you don't have something stupid installed on your system that you don't need. And man apt. It's going to show the manual page of apt for all the other commands it has. You should absolutely look at man pages when you're not sure. They're super helpful. As for depackage, like I said, you should use apt when possible, so way less commands you should really be worried about. Depackage configure packages that will run a configuration interface during the installation of a package, so if you're manually installing something. Depackage reconfigure packages, typically one that is used more often. It's going to run that configuration interface on a package that's already installed, so you can reconfigure it to default options. So let's say Red Team just totally effed with your SSH config or your FTP config. You can make a backup, make sure you have the required options for whatever you might need for your competition or your company. Do a fresh config, add in options as you go. That way you see something and you go, oh, that's not a good configuration option. Let's leave that out. But you might still have other things you need to include. Then you can also do depackage-i to install a deb file. That's a Debian package file. It will typically add a repository to your sources.list, so another server for apt to go install from. You can also do the same thing with apt install /, the deb package. If you do depackage-i, you need to follow with apt-get install-f. That's to fix broken dependencies, things like that, and then fully install the package. RedHat, you have Yum or Yellow Dog Updater Modified. Don't ask me why that's a name. I don't know. It's the default on all Red Hat-based distros, like I said. Config file lives at /etc/yum.conf. It triggers me so much that it doesn't live in a Yum directory. Repository config files, so the servers that you're going to go pull software from, live at /etc/yum.repos.d. And actually the syntax for Yum is kind of similar to apt in some ways. Yum install, list of packages, same as apt. Yum update will actually update all the packages on your system by default. You don't have to do an update and then upgrade like with apt. It does have an upgrade command, and it just basically specifies some other options with update. Meh. But yum update, actually, you can specify a list of packages to update. So that's kind of nice. You don't have to do them one by one. Although I guess apt install, you can do the same thing. Yum check update, it's kind of like a dry run. So let's say you want to update all your database files for the different pieces of software in your system, but you don't want to actually update everything. That's the command to do it. Yum local install rpm file .rpm, so whatever your rpm file, that's like a deb file, but for Red Hat. And man yum, of course, check the manual pages for yum. Has way more options than what I'm showing you. These are just common ones that you'll want to know.
Could you rename the directory to yum instead of etc?
That would break so many things. It would maybe make me feel better until I tried to use the server. And I'm gonna quick run through DNF just because, you know, in a competition like last year at Ice Age, we got some Fedora boxes, so it's good to know. It's actually got the exact same syntax as yum for the most part. There are a couple differences, but really only the advanced users need to worry about that. Its config file lives at /etc/dnf/dnfconf, so it makes me feel better. But their repo files live at /etc/yum.repos.d, which is annoying. Just change the name. But, meh. For the most part, they're very similar. DNF has just fixed a lot of issues with yum. And of course, check the man page for DNF. RPM, actually RPM is a really cool tool, even though it's the backend for the actual, or it's the backend for yum and DNF. It still has a lot of really cool features by itself. RPM-I, and then your RPM file, install a package from an RPM file. RPM-QA lists all packages currently installed. RPM-QI, and then list of packages. I'll have to fix that. It displays information about an installed package, you know, version, dependencies, cool things like that. RPM-QL, list of packages, generate a list of files installed by given packages. And a really great one here, RPM-VA. That's going to verify all packages on your system. It's going to run MD5 hashes. It's going to compare, you know, config files to the default config on a system. So when you first install the service, you get a default config file. It's going to see if they're the same or not. Really nice for checking if Red Team has messed with your stuff. It only gets you so far because if you as soon as you add like a space or something into your config, the hash will be different. So use that with a bit of grain of salt, but it does help narrow things down. And I have an example of one I ran on my system. Obviously, it's showing a lot of things that are different. We actually have this as part of our CentOS checklist. It's going to give you a lot of different codes when you run RPM-VA. It's going to show different file size, file mode, MD5 checksum is different. The major and minor versions of your file are different, so it's maybe a different version of the service than you should have. The file belongs to a different user than it should. You know, there might be a config file that's readable and writable to by everyone instead of just root. That'd be really bad. And the file time, I'm not sure how you'd really use that too much. Maybe if you know the last time you modified it. But resources on Package Manager. I really recommend that second one. Let's say a lot of you maybe, you know, not your first year here, or you did a lot of Gen Cyber and you started playing in Linux. If you know apt really well and maybe you don't know Red Hat as well as you should, the Arch Linux folks have Pacman Rosetta. It is basically a table of commands in Debian, equivalent commands in Red Hat, equivalent commands in Arch, equivalent commands in OpenSUSE. It's really nice. I use it all the time. I know I ran through that kind of fast, but you all have access to these slides for references for different commands, syntax. I've got a big lab in the different workspace. Linux Services vApp. So I guess I put the Ubuntu 12 there for demo purposes. I can actually run through some of this if you want, but I'll let you start on the lab if you feel confident. I'll actually probably run through the first couple myself. But go ahead and hop in, and you're going to need to have internet access for the package manager portion. So those of you that aren't familiar, just hop into the Ubuntu 18 client. This one should be a little speedier because it's got a light desktop environment. It's not me bashing on other ones. I'm just, yeah, it shouldn't be too sluggish. Pop open a web browser, Firefox. Go ahead and jump to some website. Mine probably is authenticated. Yours probably is not, because I was messing with this beforehand. Make sure you can hit a website, and you'll have internet access. So, for our lab, let me hop out of this. I actually have something called an SSH reverse tunnel into the iLab, so it'll be a little easier for you guys to see than the VMware console. Right now I'm logged into the Debian VM, and I will run through setting up a static IP. But I'm going to set it to a different one than what the lab requires. So, just because.
Is the login just DSU?
Yes, I'm sorry. The login for all the machines, you're going to want root for both the Linux machines, just because I didn't set up a user with sudo privileges. Okay. But password is password1 exclamation point across the board. Because I didn't care about making this thing secure. Absolutely. Oh, right. I suppose that we should use VI because that's what we're going to see more often. Network, interfaces. And I always have trouble remembering this format, so I have to go back and refer to it as well. No, go away. I don't know why it does that. Oh, yeah. ETH0 is what you're typically going to see for an interface name, but for some reason in the last few versions, a lot of distros have switched to like ENS 192 or EM33 or some weird stuff. If you see allow hot plug, go ahead and leave that. That's, I believe, the new version of auto. Mike, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Gotcha. You know? Allow hot plug, is that like a new thing? Ugh. Vi is hard. Oh, God. Let me out. What's that?
Make sure you're in insert mode before using arrow keys.
I was in insert mode. This is why we don't use Vi. Oh, God, this is terrible.
Why don't you use something else?
Just use Nano.
Yeah, I'm using something else. I'm wussing out.
Not in command mode. Then we quit out of it.
We can all agree at least it's not Emacs. Because all the Emacs users have broken pinkies. No one gets that joke. It's fine. Oh, Vim is better. Vim is better than Vi, at least. What's that? Oh, to get to this file? So if you check the slides, it'll be /etc/network/interfaces for setting a static IP. Yes. Are you in Vi? :Q. And if it still doesn't work, :Q exclamation point. Because you probably made a change and it's like you didn't save yet. It's fine. Debian will have Nano on it. CentOS won't. So that'll be fun. Or exercise to the reader, you guys could install Nano since we talked about package managers. Yes. try Nano. Right here.
I can make you one with my enter key.
In Nano?
Yeah, I couldn't define.
Oh, that's weird.
Yeah.
There are several people that know how to do this, so shoot a hand up if you're having trouble. Oh, I should bring the lab back up. So, and at 19, sure, whatever. Address net mask gateway. Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah. Once you learn about subnets, it makes more sense. Oh crap, what was the... Oh no! There we go. Yeah. Uh-oh. So, quick pro tip. Probably want to install NetTools, because I forgot to put references on how to do this with IP. Oh, crap. Oh! Oh, come on. Live demos, right?
Which box is this?
This is the Debian box. This is why I use your what?
My base VMs.
Your base VMs?
My base VMs.
Those,
My base VMs.
So you just install NetTools and then update, correct?
apt update, then install NetTools.
Update then install.
Always run apt update first. Otherwise, you might get an old version of the package. What's that? Which file? Oh, for the interfaces. It will be in /etc/network/interfaces. Probably what's going to be good, because I'm going to be jumping around a lot on the screen. If you go to the shortened URL up there, you can all open the slides. That way you have like all my references. I made these slides more for references to you guys than for a lecture. That's why I burned through it kind of quick. Let me see if I can figure out what's broken with this VM. So dumb. Okay. apt works on newer systems. You might have to use apt-get on, or you will have to use apt-get on older systems, but this is Debian 9.5, so apt by itself does work. Yeah, apt-get also still works.
Kali's installed, but it'll use either or, right?
Let's see. Kali should use either. What? What? It's a rolling release, so it's not necessarily any. It has apt, yes.
It's net-2.
It should be. Mine's broken for some reason. Apt update and then do apt install net-tools. They are separate commands.
So my connection failed.
Did you authenticate in the Ubuntu client? Need to do that first. Did you open the Ubuntu client and go to a web browser and enter your creds? If no, you need to do that. Oh, crap. I killed my SSH connection.
Whoops.
Well, this has turned into a regular tire fire. Come on. It's worked less than an hour ago.
What it'll say if it'll work, we'll just respond with.
It'll ask you for yes or no to install the package, and you just hit enter and it should install it. But after that, you'll be good to go, because then you'll have ifconfig, you'll be able to do if up, if down. I'm gonna have to bust out some Google skills.
So first you're going to type apt space update, apt space update. And once that's finished updating, then apt space update. There should be once. Then enter. Then once you finish with that, you do apt space install space net dash tools.
What? Oh.
Why can't I fix mine?
Yes, you have to go into the Ubuntu client first. Open a Firefox tab and just try to go to any website.
Right, I've already done that.
And it asks you for your username and password.
It just went to the website.
Try another website. It might have it cached, so try some like non-common website or like Reddit or, you know, Twitter. Something that isn't like up on the suggestion menu. Yeah, that might, yeah. Let's see. Well, that's a problem.
Yeah, because it didn't do that for me either.
Oh, man.
This is the DEFCON curse of live demos, isn't it?
This is the what?
The DEFCON curse of live demos. Something always go wrong.
That's just the curse of live demos. Shit breaks all the time. I cannot say I've ever had this happen before. Of course, I don't have netstat. Let's check something else quick. Maybe it's just Debian that's broken. Yeah, that works. Let's see, wget. No, that's broken too. Great. I'm sorry. This is not going well. Nick, Mike, I'm out of ideas. No, Sent is broken too. We're authenticating through the captive portal, but the Linux boxes can't hit the internet.
Just go through system CTL and service stuff.
System CTL what?
System CTL and
Oh, yeah.
just skip it. Just go packet.
Yeah, we'll skip that part. That's fine.
Or you should still need to purge. You can still purge out.
Yeah. So I'll just walk through some of that, I suppose. So if I go straight to, we'll do it in CentOS. We'll do the RedHat version. Oh, come on. All right. Okay, so if you're doing the static IP on CentOS, you'll notice there are a crap ton of options, but that's okay. You don't have to worry about most of them. Oh, mine's already set to static. How about that? Of course it is.
What was the command to get that?
So, what? Oh, I'm on the wrong system, that's why. So you do vi, because nano is not installed by default, etc sysconfig, network scripts. Oh god. In this case, it would be ifconfig eth0. That's the name of the adapter. Yep, it is only set to DHCP right now. That's more like what I had. So if we wanted to set it to static, in vi you have to hit I to actually edit text. Go to into insert mode. Set boot proto to static. Leave those options, and then I got to go back to my slides because not used to this. Ugh. Okay, IP adder, net mask, gateway. All right, that's not so bad. Someone have the lab up. What IP did I tell you to set it to? No one's referencing the slides. Wonderful. .42, okay. 1.142.
How's you using the IP thing again for CentOS?
What?
How's you using the IP change? What you're doing right now, how'd you get that?
How do I get here?
Yes.
Yes, so you do vi and then /etc/sysconfig. Remember tab completion in Linux? It's your best friend.
System thing?
Sysconfig. Two. Mask. 255, and gateway. Vi, you have to use :WQ or :X to save and exit. :W to just save. Oh, hey, there's the path right there too. /etc/sysconfig/network-scripts/if-cfg-eth0. Again, a lot easier if you look at the slides in the training folder.
Can we see the URL? I tried typing in the URL, it didn't pop up on Google.
You just type it right in the web browser completely, and it should just go to it.
It says, like, it's not available.
Okay, I'll bring up the URL once. Try that. Otherwise, if you've had the DevSec folder shared with you, you should be able to look at it in your Google Drive. No? Ah.
I posted a link in Slack.
Okay, yeah. If you're on Slack, go check there in the DevSec channel. Thank you, Nick. Is the link working?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a lot easier than me jumping around. Let me see if I can get this shit figured out now. That's annoying. Let's see. Got that saved. Now, IF up. Yep. Should just be able to do screen first. IF down, 0. You get no output, that's good. IF up. Just gonna sit there and think about it. And we now have our static IP address. No, not DNF, it's yum. Ugh. I can't win. Wait a minute. Ugh. Well then. That's a problem to troubleshoot for another day. Important thing is you guys have the slides for reference for when you're trying to do this in the future. If you don't, talk to one of the DefSec officers. We'll get you access. That's all I got. Sorry, guys. That did not go as... Oh!